Docker is one of the most important tools to learn today. If you are in the IT industry, you would have heard about the term Docker. And in this video, we would be talking about what is Docker, why do you need to learn Docker, and what is the best way to learn Docker. Thanks a lot, Pawan, for accepting to host me. It's over to you now.
It's my pleasure, Ranga. Yeah. So coming to the topic, right? Docker. So can you briefly talk about what is Docker?
Yeah. So if you look at Docker is just a way of packaging your application, right? So if you look at
Yes.
how we have been, like one of the biggest challenges that we have in the last few years, like one of the most important evolutions in the last few years is microservices architecture, right?
Yes.
If we talk about the microservices architecture, one of the biggest challenges that we had was we can develop microservices in multiple different languages. I can develop one in Java, Python, or any other language, right? So,
Yes.
uh, but as we started building microservices in different languages, the operations became really complex because how you deploy a Java application was different from how you deploy a Python application. So deployment
Yes.
of these applications was becoming really, really complex. And that's where we wanted a standard way of packaging any kind of application. And
Yes.
that's where I think Docker plays a very, very important role. Whether it's a Java microservice, whether it's a Python
Right.
microservice, or a Node.js microservice, right? So whichever microservice it is, whatever it is, you can package it as a Docker container image, and you can run it the same way. It's the same way you would
Yes.
run any of these things. And I think the
Yes.
other aspect where Docker is really, really been really good is, let's say I would want to run a MySQL on my local
Mhm.
machine, or I would want to
Yes.
install Apache Kafka on my local machine, or
Yes.
let's say I would want to run RabbitMQ on my local machine. Earlier,
Yes.
I have to actually install it on my local machine. When I want to stop, I mean, when I would want to take it away, I would need to uninstall it. There was a lot of process involved. That's one
Yes.
another area where I think Docker is playing a critical role, right? So you'd be able to now easily run MySQL as a container, and when you are done with it, you can just remove the container image and the container from your local machine, and it's gone. So I think
Yes.
those are two important aspects around Docker.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool. So yeah, since we now have a high level idea on what is Docker and where are we going to use, I think you touched upon some points where exactly are we going to use Docker. So are there more areas where the Docker is being implemented?
Right. So I think if you go to the usage of Docker, right? So today, like one of the best places where Docker is, I mean, one of the like most popular places where you run Docker containers is in the cloud, right?
Yes.
So whenever you would want to actually like look at how you would want to run containers, uh, like uh, like you can run it on your local machine, you can run
Yep.
it on, let's say, inside your data center, and
Yes.
you can also run it in the cloud. So
Yes.
Docker offers a lot of portability. So you would see that Docker is used in a lot of places. Like almost, if you look at around the world today in the software industry, a number of people are now shifting to using containers. A lot of people
Yes.
are using containers to run the application because once you have a container, you can run it anywhere. You can run it on your
Anyway.
local machine. And even a tester, for example, can download I mean, he can easily run an image. So we will also try
Yeah.
and avoid there's a problem only on my machine kind of thing, right? It's
Yes.
only
Yes.
a
Exactly.
problem in the environment. So those kind of things also can be avoided. So you'd see actually Docker used pretty much in a lot of places today.
Yes, yes. I think that's the best part, right? When you said, okay, it only works on my machine, right?
Yeah,
Now the thing is, yeah, if at all we are getting a bug in production, right? We are able to easily reproduce it in the local, provided
yeah,
okay, these are the things that I've done, right?
exactly,
That's the best
exactly.
part of it. Yeah, yeah, cool,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah,
S-
absolutely, absolutely.
So according to you, what do you think about who should be learning Docker and at what level they might be focusing on learning Docker
Yeah.
in
So
in
if
the
you look at
software industry? Yeah.
right, if you look at the important things around learning Docker, right? So
Mhm.
I think the first thing that somebody can focus on when they are learning Docker is to use Docker to install something like Docker Desktop on their machine and
Mhm.
try and use Docker to run different kinds of software, right? So you have databases, MySQL database, or things like that. You can try and run it on your local machine. You can connect to it, create a table, and see how easy it is. You could also try and run like a like queuing thing, right? For example, RabbitMQ or Kafka,
Yes.
and you
Yes.
can actually try and run those kind of software also on your machines. So
Yes.
once you
Yes.
know how to run Docker containers, uh, then probably you can shift your attention to understanding, okay, what's in a Docker image? Uh, how do I build a Docker image? How do I
Yes.
create efficient Docker images? So the first aspect I would say is try to run a lot of Docker images initially, and then you
Yes.
can get into the aspects around like trying to create Docker images. Maybe you'd want to
Cool.
create a Docker image and push it to Docker Hub, like which is the
Yes.
place where you can store a lot of Docker images, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that would be typically the journey I would like I would recommend for people. Now, when it comes to different roles,
Hmm.
I would say there are different skills that you want to focus on, right? So
Yes. Yes.
when you're talking about developer, probably you want to focus on running and also creating images. But
Yes.
maybe for a tester, only running images should be more than sufficient. If they know how to run a Docker image, that should be more than sufficient.
True.
However, if
True.
you are talking about somebody in the operations team, probably they would need to know a little bit of both. Probably they don't need to be expert at creating images, but having a high level understanding is good. But they
Yes.
should be really good at running containers, and also like developers and operations team should be also be good at networking, right? So
True. True.
maybe when you have multiple containers running, you'd want them to talk to each other. So you need to
Yes.
understand how to get them to communicate with each other. So those are the
Exactly.
aspects that like developers and the operations team need to focus on. And if we go to the next level, right? So we build a container image,
Hmm.
but running multiple containers also is not a trivial thing. If let's say I have
Yes.
50 microservices, 100 microservices, that's where probably you would want to also understand a little bit about container orchestration, like Kubernetes, right?
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, developers, I think developers and the operations team need to understand Kubernetes as well. So I think those would be the important aspects that you need to
Yes.
understand with respect to Docker uh, for different roles.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool. That was great. Yeah. So so if you would want to look at the journey that the software industry has been through, right? So given my experience also, I've seen that industry has gone through a lot of changes, right? And what do you think? No, how has Docker impacted on the engineering, software engineering community? How did it make it good? Did it make it better? Is it faster now? Is it efficient? What do you think about
Yeah, let's like if you look at standardization part, that's one of the most important areas where Docker has played a critical role, right?
it?
So
Yes.
now it's easy to build an image, and
Yes.
you are sure that that's exactly the same thing that's going to run anywhere, and you don't need
Yes.
to configure anything else as well. So
Yes.
you know that the image would contain the operating system, it contains all the libraries you would need, your code, maybe your build
Yes.
package, everything is
Yes.
part of the same container. So because we standardize that, I think that enables us to be able to run this package the same way everywhere. I think that's one of the biggest contributions from Docker to the enterprises. And this standardization helps you with operations. Right now, the operations
Exactly.
guy does not need to know what's in the package. He knows whether what, irrespective of what's in the package, you just need to run it the same way. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think this also helped us to build more levels of abstraction. Now that we have one level of abstraction where I can run multiple images the same way, we were
Yes.
able to build abstractions on top of it, like container orchestration, Kubernetes, and also we were able to build like if you look at the most simplest container orchestration, I don't know if I can call it container orchestration. Probably Docker Compose is one of the places where you can easily run multiple containers, right? You
Yes.
also have
Yes.
something like Docker Swarm, which is more
Swarm.
advanced container
Yes.
orchestration. And
Yes.
today, Kubernetes is ruling the world with respect to container orchestration. So if you want to run 100 microservices and multiple instances of each of them, probably you, like so Kubernetes formed the Docker formed the layer or the
Yes.
abstraction on top
Yes.
of which we are building a lot of more layers. So that
Yes.
helps a lot.
Yes. So as you said, we have a base layer and we are building on top of that. It's exactly when we try to think about, how do I run my app on Docker? Like, I get a base layer first and then
Yeah,
write my software on top of that, maybe my code or my application, and
yeah,
then wrap it up as one more container, right?
yeah. So you have a base image and you would add UL jars or UL Python code or your Node.js code
yes,
over it. Probably you'd install Node.js and then you would add your code on top of it. So even Docker, as you are saying, works in layers, right? So you build
yes,
one layer on top of each other. Absolutely.
yes, yes. So yeah, so coming about, as a learner, if at all I'm beginning with Docker, right, I definitely would want to go ahead with say a hello world Docker, as you
Yeah.
suggested. Okay, I would want to go. So I know that the Docker community basically comes up with that busy box, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
So
That's the best place to
yeah,
start running a
start. Yeah.
container, going in and executing a few commands. I think that's what BusyBox enables, right?
Yes, yes. So, so talking about all these things, I want to, when I'm learning something, I want things or tricks, that basically Docker can do for us, which would create an interest in me. So, do you have? I know that Docker has a lot of tricks up its sleeve. So, would you want to throw some light on that? What all Docker can do for us, like
Yeah.
externalizing the configurations, or some other stuff like that.
Yeah. So I see if you look at Docker, right? So you are creating a package for your
Hmm.
application. And
Yeah, yeah.
if you want something like you want to connect to another application, probably you'd want
Yes,
to have an environment variable
yes,
to like so that you can actually connect to the other application. So those are the
yes,
things you can. I mean, obviously there are a lot of things, a lot of flexibility that there is when you are running Docker containers as well. So environment
yes.
variables is one of them.
Yes, the externalization of the configuration, right? So
Yeah,
since we all know that the environment configurations take higher priority than the configurations that are in the application properties or whatever that we
absolutely.
have, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah, Docker comes in handy. We don't have to actually package our secrets into the uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
image.
Yeah. And also, if you look at Docker images, I think building Docker images in an efficient way, that's another
Yes, yes,
thing Docker, I mean, developers
developer.
should focus on. Because
Yes,
you'd
yes,
want to, like, if I'm building a Docker image, Docker is intelligent in the sense that it knows up to what level it can reuse. So if I have
yes,
10
yes,
layers in a Docker image, and if only the layer 10 is changing, then it will only build like it will reuse up to layer 9 and it will only add the layer 10.
yes,
However,
yes,
if every time you build code, let's say your layer 2 is changing, then all the layers above it also need to be rebuilt. So that's another thing I think somebody who's new to Docker needs to focus on. So when you're building
yes, yes.
Docker images, if your building of Docker images taking a lot of time, then you can see which layer is getting reused and try and make as many layers immutable so that only the layers on top of them are changing.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about this, right? Initially, when I was learning Docker, I was looking at this. Okay, why is it taking this much time to build an image in local, right?
Exactly.
So then I'm like, okay, I have been through so many articles that point. Okay, so Docker has caching, right? So it
Absolutely.
caches each step we write in the Docker file is a
Yeah.
separate container which is cached in the memory,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So it's like a you are each step in your Docker file typically leads to a layer, and
Yes,
up to wherever there is nothing changed, it would try and reuse it, right? So
yes,
if you look at, for example, Java applications, we have a number of jar files which
yes,
are part of the image, and
yes,
probably the only thing which would be changing is the class files which are generated,
yes,
right? Typically, when I'm writing new code, the class files are the only ones which would change. So if my
yes,
layers are in such a way that first I have the operating system, then I have Java, then I have the jars, and then I have the class files. Then each time only the class files get replaced.
yes,
But
yes,
if you if you are adding the jar files and class as the same layer, or
yes,
if you are actually like add reversing the thing, or if you have one layer with all of them, if you have a, let's say, a var file or something, then the jar files are each and every time it creates a new layer for that. So
yeah,
yeah, it's very very important. I mean, the same thing when it comes to npm packages with node.js. So you need to be really really careful about the order in which you have this step, in the order in which you are building the Docker image.
yes, yes. So when you talk about npm and node package, right? I understand this beautiful scenario, right? I know that 90% of the time I might not change my package.json, right? It's fixed 90% of the time.
Exactly,
Frequently,
exactly,
what changes is my code. So what I would do is first take out the package JSON, install all the packages, then put in my code, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep,
It's
yep.
a
It's the
beautiful
same.
thing. It's a very good example to look on. Yeah.
Exactly. I
And
think even like Python, right? It's the same.
yes,
So even in Python,
requirement.txt we put in,
exactly.
install the stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
So
irrespective of the language, the concept remains the same. And that's the
yes,
beauty of Docker, right? So we are talking about these different things, and like Docker would be able to run once you create a package. I mean, once you create a Docker image, irrespective of whether it's a Python application, a Java application, you'd use a Docker run command, or you would actually put it in a Kubernetes cluster and you'd be able to run it, irrespective of
yes,
what's in it. And all the concepts like environment variables, all of them are again language neutral, right? It does
yes,
not
yes,
matter how do you configure an environment variable for a container. It's neutral. I mean, it's language
yes,
neutral. The same
yes.
thing, like irrespective of the application which is present in there, you do it the same way.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So just like when you said language neutral, the example that comes into my mind is the SDKs that AWS builds, right? So there are in numerous SDKs that are built like Python SDK, Java SDK. So if we consider the externalized configuration like AWS profile or AWS credentials, right? They're all neutral. Like, they are standard across any language, right? Today I
Exactly.
might write a code using the SDK Java, right? Tomorrow I
Right.
want to change it to Python, but still the configuration remains same, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So
Yep. That's right.
awesome, cool. So do you want to talk a bit more about the Docker Hub, right? So you mentioned Docker Hub is a place where I can put my image, right? Maybe throw some light on how to we get on that. Yeah.
Right. So if like let's say I'm building a new application, right? I would want to build a Docker image for something crazy database I'm building today, right? So what I can do is actually I can create a Docker image for that database, and I can push it. The concept is called pushing. You can push it to a Docker hub, and once I push it to a Docker hub, if I'm making it public, then for example, you want to make use of the Docker image, then you can pull it. So whenever you're
Yes.
pulling a Docker image, you are actually pulling it from the Docker hub and using it from the repository. And
Yes.
typically, when you go to enterprises, you don't want to make them public, right? So
Yes. Yes.
typically, there would be like in-house Docker uh, repositories in each of the enterprises, right? So
I
that's
believe
how.
something like Harbor, or maybe if at all they're using cloud, something like ECR in Amazon or something like that,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have ECR in Amazon, you have GCR in Google Cloud, and
Yes.
what do you call it in Azure? I'm not sure what it's called in Azure. So each of the
Yes.
clouds have their own container registries, container
Yes. Yes.
repositories, and yeah, most of the enterprises have their own like in-house container repositories as well.
Repositories.
So yeah, if you are building an application and probably the first thing that you would do is during your during your continuous integration cycle, you can build an image and put it out there, and you can use that image to deploy it
In
to
the
multiple
CD. Yeah.
environments.
In the CD.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the CD, you would be actually using the image which is built from your repository.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. So, do you want to put more lights on other tricks like logs, or maybe how to debug exactly what's going wrong inside the container? Can I log in and look at the environment parameters or stuff like that?
Yeah, you can actually. So you like see any Docker container, you can actually like go inside and start executing commands. You can actually go inside the thing and you can start executing commands. And another important thing that you were touching upon is logging. Like one of the
Yes. Yes.
biggest advantages is like if you are like, for example, uh, like all the logs, irrespective of the application, irrespective of the language in which you are building the application in, you can actually start streaming the logs to a centralized logging kind of a thing, right? That's one of the
Exactly.
biggest advantages of having standardization. So just like
Yes.
you have standard environment variables, whatever logs come out of your container, you can actually pipe them to a centralized repository, and then you have piping across. I mean, you have a centralized log repository where when you have a problem, you can go and search on, right? So yeah, I think standardization around logging also is a very, very important thing. And you can also build traces and like all the kinds of, like say I'm making an API call from a
Yes.
container,
Yes.
right? So you can
Yes.
intercept that, you can have some kind of a service mesh to intercept that call, and then probably you can actually yeah, have some kind of a distributed tracing kind of a system also built around your
Yes.
containers.
Yes. Standard. I looked at when they standardize a specific ID to the whole request, and then they pass on the ID with the request to trace like, what is the sequence. Okay, where did we break
Exactly.
exactly?
Yeah, I
Cool.
think containers play a huge role in standardizing everything, right? So now,
Yes.
irrespective of the language, it's the same input, same output, and how you run it is the same. So that's the most important element that Docker brings. I think for me, standardization is the number one thing. That's that's the selling point of Docker.
Yes, yes, yes. I agree on that. So coming back to probably an important aspect that we just put a light upon is the Docker networking, right? You mentioned developers
Right.
and DevOps or operations team people. They
Yeah,
majorly have to understand how networking works in Docker, right? So
absolutely.
so do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, at a high level, I think networking is very, very important, right? Whenever we
Yes.
want to be able to run something,
Mhm.
being like having right control over what the code can do, right? You
Yes.
do like because when you look at Docker containers, right? So there can be multiple containers of different microservices which can be running. So on the same machine, because we are doing
Yes.
virtualizing, we
Yes.
would have a lot of virtualization. So it would be same hardware. I would be running multiple Docker containers, and
Yes.
then security becomes really, really important, right? So
Exactly.
you'd want to ensure that only the right container is able to talk to the other containers. So establishing this is where networking is very, very important. So it's very, very important to create the right kind of Docker networks and enable communication only to specific containers, right? If you are running a couple of containers, like like you need to be in control of what communication is allowed, what is not allowed, and that's what Docker networking allows you to do. So you'd be able
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
say, okay, container A is able to talk to container B, but I
B.
don't want to allow a container B to talk to container C, for example, right? So by default, no communication is allowed, and you can decide what's allowed.
Yes, yes. I think a classic example would be a application that is hosted to have a front end, right? I definitely would not want anything outside to call my backend service. So I do not even want to expose the API to the public internet, right? So let the
Exactly.
front end orchestrator take care of pulling it, sending out the request into the Docker network, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect example, right? So typically,
Yes.
you would not want to run your front end and the back end on the same place. Probably you'll have
No, different
like
containers, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree on that. So front end would be running somewhere, and there will be running some. There are very rare cases where everything is running in the same network as such in the Docker network. Exactly.
yeah. I
I
mean,
get
when
that.
you have like for example, if you have a microservices architecture, it's possible
Yes.
that you can have multiple microservices which are running as part of the same network.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Or you might
Cool.
have a like pair compute. Like let's say you have a container and you might have something like a sidecar container which is running along with it, right? So that's also
Exactly.
possible.
Yes. Yes. So I believe that comes into the picture when we are talking about something like service mesh, which sits right. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So when I think service mesh is little advanced conversation to
Yes.
go in depth
Yes.
for this conversation. Probably we'll talk about it a little bit more when we talk about Kubernetes in the next video. I mean, next
Yes.
session that we'll have. Yeah, I think
E-
service mesh, like having a sidecar container, will make it. Yeah, that's what is one of the most important things as part of implementing a service mesh, right?
Yes, yes. So one more trick up on the sleeve of the Docker, right? You can run uh, multiple applications inside just one container, right? For example,
Right,
like if I have one microservice, I can have its own database on that container.
right,
I can
right. Not recommended, but
not
you can do
recommended,
that.
but yes, yeah, just for quick, dirty development tricks and all.
Exactly. You can,
Yeah.
I mean, you can do, I mean, you can have whatever you would want on a Docker
Yes,
image. It's like
yes,
you are like a Docker image is, I would say it's very, very similar to your laptop, right? Whatever you can
yes,
do on a laptop, you can actually put it into your or computer, right? You
yes.
can actually put it inside a Docker image and do that. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I would not definitely recommend,
It's
like typically I'm a very, very big believer in single responsibility principle, not just
yes,
with code,
exactly.
but also with anything, right? So you'd rather have something which has specific responsibility. So you would
Then
have a container which would probably do one thing, and you don't want to
exactly, exactly.
have multiple things done. Then, like if you have multiple things done as part of your container, handling security for it, networking for it, and also like yeah, you need to like let's say they talk to multiple things, then you need to open it a lot of things up. So there
Yes,
are a lot of complications that would come up, and also scaling them like
it's a tough
if you
thing.
have
Yes.
multiple things, each of them might have individual scaling needs, right? You don't want to scale them the same way. So yeah,
Yes,
that's another
obviously,
aspect
because
where
the service might have a different startup time, and the database inside it might have a different startup time. That would make it
exactly.
difficult. Like, okay, what am I doing with this? Okay, should I give it 30 seconds? Should I give it 60?
Yeah,
I don't want to confuse myself with all that. But yeah, this
exactly.
is
You keep it simple. Yeah, I think
yes, keep
the point is really valid, right? So it enables you to do a lot. It gives you a lot of power.
yes,
Obviously, we would not need to abuse it, but it gives you a lot of power.
definitely, definitely, true, true. Yeah, and uh, I think I pretty much rounded up. No, I think we have covered about so many points on Docker and on a high level, which would basically help.
Absolutely.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty much good on this session, Ranga. It was nice talking to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pawan. Thanks a lot for
Yeah.
hosting this. I had a nice time. I think Docker is something which is very, very important for almost everybody who's involved in IT to learn. As we
Yes.
head more and more to the cloud,
Yes.
I think the use of Docker is only going to grow. I mean, whether it's Docker, it might be something else, but containers, the concept of containers is only going to grow, and the concept
Yes.
of container orchestration is only going to grow, right? I mean, they bring a lot of standardization, and also in terms of performance, there have been a lot of improvements with containers and container orchestration over the last few years as well. So
Yes.
yeah, it's going to be a standard almost across the industry. So if you have, if anybody out there have not learned Docker there, please go out, learn it. Another thing is, like if we have not answered any of the questions related to Docker that you have in your mind, if they are high level questions, we would want to actually probably create a follow up video talking about it.
Yeah.
So please do feel free to post them in the comments and we will take them up a little later. Thanks a lot, Pawan, for hosting this. I'm like delighted that you agreed to host us on this.
Pleasure is
I'll
mine. Pleasure.
probably, we will see you. I'll see you again in another session related to DevOps. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. Thank you, Ranga.